Hello there, you're watching the Press Preview. A first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. And it's time to see what is making the headlines with the director of the Demos think tank, Polly Mackenzie, and the political commentator and former government special advisor, Salma Shah. Thanks so much, both of you, for joining us this evening. Look forward to looking through your choices. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what is on the front of some of those papers. The Mail predicts that a change to COVID travel rules will trigger the Great Autumn Holiday Stampede. Same story for The Times. Their headline, Travel Boom After COVID Rules Eased. The Mirror says families are getting ready for half-term holidays after the major shake-up of the foreign travel rule. Senior scientific advisors claim the government is no longer listening to their advice at a crucial point in the pandemic. That's on the front of The Guardian. The Express goes with warnings of massive disruption to the delivery of meat, beer and fizzy drinks within days because of a carbon dioxide shortage. The Telegraph says Russia has been accused of rigging gas prices and that the UK food market could be plunged into chaos. That's also the lead story for the Financial Times, which reports the steel industry could also be badly affected. The Sun hears that 2 professional dancers on Strictly have refused to take the COVID vaccine. And The Star has a story about people not trying traditional British food like toad in the hole because they don't believe the dishes exist. Toad in the hole is very real. We're joined tonight by Polly Mackenzie and Salma Shah to take us through their choices. Hello, ladies. Thank you both so much for joining us. We're going to start this evening with the Daily Mail. We talked a lot about COVID over the last 24 hours. Now it's official. The rules have been changed. Fewer countries on that red list. Amber's done away with and fewer PCR tests. Polly, do you think we are going to see a great autumn holiday stampede, as the Mail says?
I'm sure we will. You know, lots of people did have holidays in the UK this year because of the complexity of getting overseas. And that led to kind of pressure on prices for what is still debatable, whether it's a staycation or simply holidaying in the UK. But nevertheless, prices went up. We had to camp because it was literally the only kind of holiday that we could find that was available. And if the opportunity now comes because of this unravelling of those restrictions for more people to travel overseas during the half-term holidays, we can expect to see that price surge again because, of course, huge numbers of people, including peevish little me, are stuck, unable to go on holiday and take advantage of this, except when the kids are off. So whether it is Christmas or the autumn half term, I think lots of people will be thinking about it if they can. The danger is, of course, we don't know if case numbers will surge and we don't know if new variants will emerge, which force the government, as has been in the news a little bit this week, to reconsider or pull some of the guidelines back in again. But for the moment, yeah, lots of enthusiasm for those of us with the freedom to go on holiday.
And I don't know about you, Salma, I don't know whether you had to endure camping as well this summer. But I suppose the big question is, it's the timing of it and whether or not it could backfire if the numbers do then go up after the October half term.
I think that's a very real concern. The issue that I think that gives perhaps the government and certainly me a little bit more confidence is that case numbers haven't surged in the way that they were expected to once the schools had come back. So we may have a situation where actually case numbers can be contained and the government is feeling a little bit more confident, and that's why they're releasing international travel. I think we just heard there that we are worried about other variants that may emerge as a consequence of more movement. But there is something I think that's interesting about some of the countries that have been taken off the red list. So you've got countries like Pakistan on there. And we know, obviously, it borders with India, where the Delta variant has been rife. And we actually don't know what the vaccination situation is on the ground in countries like that. So there is some serious risk in some of these areas, some of these choices.
And Polly, I suppose that risk is heightened by the fact that the PCR tests are going to be scrapped for lots of people, which was the test that was able to work out which variant people may have been exposed to.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you take the lateral flow test, the simple one that you can just do at home and the line emerges to tell you whether you've probably got COVID or not. Absolutely, you can't then do the DNA sequencing. Simplifying this makes a lot more people able to travel, also more people able to come to the UK and help boost our flagging tourism industry, our hotels, our hospitality. So you can understand why the government's doing that. But again, I think they have to remain open to the idea that restrictions might need to be tightened again, however much we might all not want that to happen. If the situation changes, well, then the rules are going to have to change too.
Salma, I mean, do you think that there was a lot of pressure on the government from the tourism industry to push to get this reopening for the October break?
I think they've resisted pressure from the tourism industry and the aviation industry for such a long time that it doesn't strike me as the kind of thing that they would give into now. I think a lot of it is to do with the fact that they feel a new sense of confidence with the numbers around cases and hospitalizations. That said, I think Polly's absolutely right that they can't rule out, and their language has been much more cautious around the fact that restrictions may come back. And so there is this push to vaccinate, and certainly push to vaccinate 12 to 15-year-olds, and also create this booster jab, which I think that they are hoping is going to get them through without reversing any of these openings.
Well, we shall see. We shall see. The other story that a couple of the broadsheets are leading with, the FT and the Daily Telegraph, is about gas prices. And Polly, the Daily Telegraph, its line is Russia's accused of rigging gas prices. The FT saying gas crisis hits more industries. This is really going to affect us all, isn't it? I mean, it's gone from a story that was maybe on the business pages that people weren't really taking much notice of, because our household bills are really going to go up.
Well, that's the first obvious consequence of gas prices going up, is that we are very likely to see that filter through to our own heating bills. And the way the energy price cap operates means that, you know, it will change the pricing dynamics as well. Compare the market, for example, of withdrawn energy switching, one of the papers is reporting, but just temporarily. But whilst because some of the tariffs have been withdrawn and restricted, and to sort of calm the market down. But it's more complicated than that. What's fascinating, you know, that set out in these articles, for example, pesticide companies are being shut down in terms of their operations because it's too expensive because of the cost of natural gas. That's leading to a crisis in the supply of CO2, which is likely to lead to a supply crisis in terms of fresh meat. And you were reminded, I think, of how interconnected all of this is, and the way that energy prices can shift so many of the different dynamics in our economy. And we've already got, because of Brexit, because of COVID, all sorts of supply chain disruptions. And so this, you know, Russia's behaviour, Telegraph is kind of directing it at to, I think it's much more complicated than that, but it adds just another enormous dynamic, which also puts pressure on inflation, which we're experiencing as we emerge from the crisis, which could have a huge effect on fiscal and monetary policy if it doesn't, as most economists are predicting, disappear once we're fully recovered. But it's fingers crossed really about that.
And Salma, it is really complicated, isn't it? Because, as Polly says, it's not just Russia, it's the fact that we perhaps possibly don't store enough of our own energy as we could do in the UK. And we've also seen this fire down at this cable plant down in Kent over the last couple of days. But do you think it's true? Do you think Russia is rationing gas to Europe?
I think it's probably the case that the Russian state does have a huge influence on what some of the state enterprises do. I mean, we've obviously talked about the complexity of what happens to people's cost of living, what happens to supply chains. But the international dynamic is important, because this investigation that is looking at Russia's actions is suggesting that there has been an unfair increase. And this just speaks to the fact that actually we are living in quite uncertain global times. We are getting a little bit more, particularly within Europe, which has been protected for such a long time from these kind of like changing dynamics. It looks like that is changing, and there's a little bit of instability that exists around energy in the way that it hasn't done for a very long time.
Because, Polly, Russia are pushing to get use of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, aren't they? Is this the right way to go about it, do you think, putting putting pressure on the rest of Europe?
The political dynamics between Russia and Europe are incredibly complicated. But I think what they can see is that because of this range of post-pandemic inflationary pressures, because of supply chain disruption, actually putting pressure on industry around gas supply is a profound way potentially to secure an obvious political advantage around a pipeline. But I think when you look at Russia's tactics in the West more broadly, actually destabilization and disruption is more what they're interested in. It's why, Russian intelligence services have been involved in disinformation and misinformation campaigns. It's not just simple propaganda to promote a worldview. It's to try and disrupt and discombobulate. And so I think, trying to sort of single out a particular motive when it comes to Russia is actually not acknowledging the complexity of the way they seek to influence the West.
And of course, Salma, also there's been a lot of emphasis on renewable energy, Britain becoming more self-sufficient and generating its own energy. But we've had the double whammy this year that actually we've not had a lot of energy from wind turbines because it's not been very windy.
Well, this is always the difficulty with renewables in that sense. But there is something else that is difficult, is that we also want to be green. So we're cutting down our coal-powered stations, which is the right thing to do. But at the same time, there's very little that's going on in terms of infrastructure to replace it. So people are very anti-fracking, and those kind of fracking sites that companies are looking at to exploit are also very slow in coming on stream, if they will at all. So we are dealing with a much more unstable energy picture in the UK. And, again, added to that, people are very nervous about nuclear. So there don't seem to be very many good options.
Mm. We all need to insulate our homes, don't we? Maybe those climate protesters on the M25 are right. We'll come on to that possibly in the next bit. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. And with me now, Polly Mackenzie and Salma Shah taking us through their choices. And we talked about gas and renewable energy in the first half. And this half, we've got an inside page from the Mail. And this is about the eco-protesters who've closed down lots of the M25 throughout the course of the week. Police finally get tough on the eco-mob, as the Mail describes them. Polly, do you think these guys are succeeding? Are they making their point, or are they alienating more people than they're converting?
It's really debatable, because we have seen over the period when Extinction Rebellion has been active quite a shift in attitudes to climate change and people's enthusiasm and willingness to accept even some kind of financial or kind of regulatory burdens in order to tackle climate change. Nevertheless, when they conduct tactics like this, I just can't believe that it's not alienating at least enough people to make it harder for the government to actually move. What we really need around climate change is to de-escalate it. Not because it doesn't matter, but because it does. And in fact, this sort of turning it into a sort of culture war and screaming at everybody and lying down in front of cars just raises the tension instead of us being able to have a real debate about the issues they're raising. I mean, a particular tactic I don't understand here is that it's an insulation campaign. They want to insulate houses. I agree with that, very important. And they're lying down in front of cars. The two are not particularly well linked, but hey, maybe I just want it to be tidy in a press release or something.
I know, because they've held me up a few times this week, and I did want to sort of, shout out the window, I've lagged my pipes, I've done my loft, let me through. I'm one of the good ones, but as you say, it's quite indiscriminate, isn't it? Salma, I mean, do you think that these groups have an important point? Do you think that that we need these kind of groups in society, or do you think that it's just going to make the government more dug in and that it won't be held to ransom?
I have to say, I always try and be equivocal about things like this, and I try and see the other point of view. And it's very rare that I will take a really strong opinion on a group like this. But I have to say, I find Extinction Rebellion completely and utterly pointless. I do think that they alienate people. I think that their tactics are childish. I think, we've made the case, and the world has moved into a place where it understands the pressures on the climate, and we know that we are running out of time to do stuff about it. This is not constructive. This is not not something that's going to encourage people to go out there and really change their patterns and behaviours. And also, this isn't really just about getting individuals to insulate their loss. This is also about a global effort around climate change. So it feels to me that this is slightly novelty and designed to get headlines, but is never really going to move the movement on any further.
OK, let's just have a little bit of light relief for the end of the paper review. And you've chosen the front of the Daily Star. Its headline, "The Great British Burk-Off." These are apparently half-wits who've never tried traditional British grub, such as toad in the hole, largely, Polly, because apparently they think it has real toads in it.
Well, I mean, they're wrong. Basically, all of this is sausages. I mean, the Great British Sausage, which we know has been very controversial around Brexit and where we can transport it. There is 1,000 things you can do with a sausage, but don't make spotted dick with sausages. That's cake with raisins. Yeah. People should try these things. And of course, they've got stupid names. I think the food shortages won't get so bad, though, that we have to actually resort to eating toads.
I have to say, I'm a massive fan of toad in the hole. And also, do you know where it came from, the phrase toad in the hole?
No.
Up in Almouth in Northumberland, a man playing golf got a hole in one. When he went to retrieve his ball, there was a toad in the hole, and they baked this dish for him at the local pub in celebration.